Hey Spire athletes, it's Brooke here. Thank you for tuning in to our first week of 8 weeks together. Today we're going to start by talking about the very basics of nutrition and how nutrition fuels the athlete. So again, thank you for being here and let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about the importance of fueling the athlete and why nutrition can be so vital to our performance as athletes. We're also going to be talking about the basics of nutrition. We're going to discuss the macronutrients known as carbohydrates, protein, and fat. We're going to learn how each one of these macronutrients plays a key role in our nutrition and our success as an athlete. So let's get started. So, why is fueling the athlete so important? So, food is fuel, and I want you guys to think about this over the course of the next 8 weeks. Is that what you put into your body is going to help fuel the exercise and the activities that you do. So, when we increase our nutrition and we start thinking a little bit more about how certain foods can impact our performance, we may see some enhanced performance, we can see decreased risk of injury, we can see decreased recovery time after a workout, so you won't be so sore for so long. And we can also see increased energy in your day-to-day activities. So a couple of points here. Sometimes you might feel really tired or dragged down after you work out. That's all related to nutrition. So we want to talk about those really, really important topics today. Okay, guys, think about this. Your body needs fuel or energy just like a car needs gas. Now, what happens if a car runs out of gas? It just stops. It doesn't run anymore. The same thing happens with your body, and you have to think about your body like that. If it doesn't have any fuel, you're not going to be able to perform the way that you would like. And once you give it the fuel that it needs, the performance increases from there. So I just want you to think about this analogy as we go through these 8 weeks together. And that is, again, your body needs fuel or energy just like a car needs gas. So now that we know that food equals fuel, what fuel does our body use? So our unit of energy in the human body is actually called a kilocalorie. And you may have heard it be called a calorie before, but the full name is actually called a kilocalorie. So every day we use kilocalories for energy. So the more active we are, the more kilocalories we use. So it's important to know that even when we don't do anything, if we're not working out, we're just like sitting on the couch or we're just sleeping, we are still using kilocalories because our body constantly uses energy. So it's extra important when we're athletes to be giving ourselves extra energy, so we make sure that all the energy that we expend, we are replacing it through food. And I'm sure most of you know that kilocalories come from food. So it's super important as athletes to be able to consume enough food from kilocalories to be able to fuel all of our day-to-day activities, including our athletic events, whether it be soccer, track and field, basketball, swimming. We all need kilocalories. So here we go, talking about the nutrition basics. So carbohydrates are our main source of energy in the human body. Carbohydrates, also known as glucose, are also known as energy. So all the carbohydrates that we eat immediately turn into energy for our body to use, and that helps fuel our activities and our day-to-day tasks. So carbohydrates also contain something called fiber, and fiber helps keep our digestive system healthy, and it helps keep us full and satisfied after we eat. So fiber is really, really important for the athlete. And we also want to talk about protein. So protein is our body's building blocks. Protein helps repair and build muscles, cells, tissues. Protein can also help you fight infection, and extra protein that you consume is used for energy. So we want to make sure we get enough protein to make sure that we have all of those vital building blocks of repair and muscle growth. And then if we ever consume extra protein that we need, our body just uses it as energy. So then we also have fat. And fat also provides us with energy. It helps us absorb certain nutrients, it keeps our organs protected, and it creates important hormones that helps our body carry out very important day-to-day functions. All right, so now that we know what each macronutrient does and how the macronutrient works in our body, we're going to talk about where we can get these macronutrients from. So the first thing we're going to talk about is carbohydrates. And you can get carbohydrates from bread, grains, pasta, beans, potatoes, fruits, and vegetables. So we can get carbohydrates from a wide variety of foods, and that's a great thing. So the first category is the bread, grains, and the pasta. And when I refer to grains, I'm referring to rice and quinoa. And whole grains contain fiber, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about fiber on the next slide. And then we have beans and potatoes, and these are other sources of carbohydrate that give us some fiber. And then we have fruits and vegetables. And I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, eat the rainbow, but there's some truth to that. And that's because all of the different kinds of fruits and vegetables each contain lots of different vitamins and minerals. So we got to make sure we get a wide variety of colors of fruits and vegetables in our diet to make sure that we're getting all of those necessary vitamins and minerals that are needed to carry out our day-to-day body functions and keep our body running efficiently as possible. So I want to touch on refined grains and whole grains. So there's two different types of carbohydrate, and there's one called refined grains and there's one called whole grains. So first we'll talk about refined grains. And these are grains that have been stripped of their fiber. So they go through a processing that takes their fiber away, and that just leaves it with, at its very basic level, the glucose or the sugar. So it's a very quick energy source because the fiber is removed. So what fiber does is it slows down the digestion of the carbohydrate. So when we take the fiber away, it's a super quick energy source. So these are good for athletes when they are working out during their exercise or right before when you need some quick digestive energy. So we can find refined grains in white bread, white pasta, white rice, cakes, muffins, and donuts. So basically anything that's not a whole grain, which is on this next category, is going to be a refined grain. So whole grains contain fiber. So they are a longer energy source because they take a little bit longer to digest in our systems. And whole grains help digestion because of that fiber again. So the fiber helps build bulk in our stool, in our bowel movements, and it can just ease our digestion. So examples of whole grains are things like 100% whole grain or whole wheat bread, brown rice, quinoa, or oatmeal. And whole grains, if you're buying them from like a food store, on the package they most likely will say 100% whole grain or 100% whole wheat. So refined grains versus whole grains in the athlete's mind can be used for two separate instances. The refined grains can be used for quick energy during workouts or right before workouts, and whole grains can be used as a longer energy source. So after you work out or 2 to 3 hours before you work out, a whole grain would be the right time. And that's not to say that you should go out and have a donut right before practice, because that probably wouldn't sit well in your tummy. But if you have just like a plain slice of white bread or a plain bowl of white rice, that's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about those quick energy sources. So this brings us to the next macronutrient, which is protein. So protein can be found in meat, it can be found in beans, in tofu, and also dairy. So any type of meat like chicken, turkey, beef, pork, eggs, fish, and seafood, all are great sources of protein. And then if you don't eat meat, beans and tofu are where you're going to be able to get the most of your protein from. And then dairy is another source where you can get it protein from Greek yogurt, you can get it from milk, cottage cheese, and cheese. Now the funny thing about dairy is that it contains carbohydrates, protein, and fat at a pretty even ratio, but I like to put it under the protein category because sometimes athletes have a hard time getting in enough protein. So I just want you to think about dairy as a protein source for you as a way to increase the amount of protein that you take in. And again, dairy can be for meat eaters or for people that don't necessarily like to eat meat. So this is just a quick, brief overview of protein for the meat eater and for the non-meat eater. What I'm going to talk about is fat. So fats come from nuts, oils, avocados, fatty fish, and nut butters. So fat is also really, really important in our diet as well. And we can get them from almonds, walnuts, seeds, cashews. We can get them from oils like olives, avocado oil, soybean oil, canola oil, and vegetable oil. And then we can get a lot of fat from avocados, which is great. And I'm sure we all love peanut butter or some sort of nut butter like almond butter. Those are very tasty and they also are considered a fat. So just like there are two different types of carbohydrate, there are two different types of fat as well. And the first is the saturated fat. And these fats are solid at room temperature. So if you think about butter or coconut oil or even cheese, all of these food items are going to be solid if you leave them on the counter for longer periods of time. And these saturated fats are found in things like pastries or baked goods, fried food, and packaged food. So a lot of times saturated fat is touted as a quote-unquote unhealthy food, but I want you guys to keep in mind that as athletes, you need plenty of fat in your diet, and I don't want you to be afraid of saturated fat, but more about just being aware of what foods contain saturated fat. So then there's also unsaturated fat, which is liquid at room temperature. And these fats are usually found in olive oil, found in olives, avocados, olives, nuts, and seeds. And these fats contain omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, which improve our brain's function and also help with a number of other functions in our body. So unsaturated fats are typically quote unquote healthier than the saturated fat just because they have a little bit more nutritional value in them and they can help our bodies run more smooth. And the saturated fat kind of does the opposite, where they can actually clog up our arteries if we have too much of them. So we want to limit the amount of saturated fat that we have, but you can still have some of it, just not a lot of it. And then the unsaturated fat, you still want to limit, but it's a little bit better than the saturated fat. So you just want to decipher the difference between saturated fat versus unsaturated fat. So now that we've learned all about what types of macronutrients are in what kinds of food, I want to emphasize that carbohydrates, protein, and fat are all equally important. We need a well-balanced diet. We need to have each macronutrient to help fuel our day-to-day activities and especially our athletic performances. And now just to wrap everything up, I want to talk about everything that we talked about today in one little slide so you guys can remember the really important stuff. So we talked about why nutrition is important, and that's because nutrition has the ability to increase our performance, decrease our risk of injury, increase our energy, and decrease our recovery time after really hard workouts. We also talked about a kilocalorie and how a kilocalorie is our unit of energy. And then we get all of our energy and kilocalories from food. So we want to make sure that we are eating all of our kilocalories that we are using throughout the day. So we never want to be under fueling. We want to make sure that we are having adequate kilocalories to make sure that we are properly fueled and properly hydrated as well throughout the day. And again, it's important because it can increase our performance and all of those other points that I talked about just before. So we also talked about the nutrition basics, and we talked about carbohydrates, protein, and fat, and how all of these play a key role in our body and how important it is to get a well-balanced diet to make sure that we're getting all of the benefits from each macronutrient in our diet. So I hope you guys enjoyed the first week, and I'll see you next week, and we're going to talk about the athlete's plate next week and how our plate changes based on how we are working out. So I'll see you then, and thanks for sticking around for week 1.